right, let's make sense of this moment. Bring in now Emmanuel Matambo, a research director with the Center for Africa-Asia Studies, and joins us now via our video link. Great to have you on the SABC News channel, sir. Thanks very much indeed for helping us make sense of these interesting times. And I wonder what you make as a start of how South Africa has responded to the US's stance, shall we call it, even though it's been conveyed via social media. I mean, if you just listen to the words, for example, that Vincent Magwenya uses about how South Africa doesn't take kindly to being insulted by another country, you certainly get a sense that there's a bit of the shift in the language.
Good morning, first of all, and good morning to your viewers. The shift in language actually preceded the current developments about South Africa not being invited to Miami next year. When it was decided by Donald Trump at the 11th hour that a charge d'affaires accepts South Africa's handing over of the G20 baton, Vincent Magwenya simply said the president will not hand over to a charge d'affaires. So already that could show that South Africa has kind of rediscovered its own respect, because there has been a lot of vacillation on the part of Donald Trump. When President Cyril Ramaphosa visited him in the White House, he did not give a definite answer on whether or not he was going to attend the G20. And then at another point, he said, well, he was willing to send J.D. Vance. And then he changed his mind, boycotted the entire conference, and then right at the end he now says, okay, then I'm going to send a diplomat of very low-key standing compared to a president. And it was only right that President Cyril Ramaphosa puts his foot down. So the language that Vincent Magwenya has used is kind of paying Donald Trump in his own coin, so to say.
Right, and it's interesting because Donald Trump in that post described this charge d'affaires as a senior U.S. representative. So I guess here's another point where we disagree. Be that as it may, the sense I'm getting, Emmanuel, is that it doesn't seem the facts really matter. I mean, there have been so many instances where there was an attempt from South Africa to try, at the very least, clarify the facts. With that in mind, though, it's difficult to just shrug our shoulders because, let's face it, the decisions made by the US president are consequential. You know, if, for example, he goes through with that promise to cut all aid to South Africa, it's not something we can really scoff at.
Well, I'll answer that. I'll respond in two sets here. The first set is the fact that what Donald Trump is doing is kind of counterproductive to the United States' own global image. This is an image that has been painstakingly built for more than 3/4 of a century, since the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the United Nations. And then when it comes to explaining really what has been happening towards South Africa, you realize that it is towards Donald Trump's own personal interest rather than the interest of the United States, because of people that have funded his re-election last year. These are Elon Musk and Miriam Adelson. These are people who have been vehemently against South Africa. Elon Musk, because of the impasse that he was in when he wanted to bring Starlink technologies here. Miriam Adelson was one of Trump's biggest campaign donors, and she's an Israeli-American physicist and a billionaire to boot. So it was not by coincidence that at the time when South Africa was taking the Israeli government to the International Court of Justice on genocide charges, Donald Trump again comes and accuses South Africa of genocide. And as you rightly put it, and facts seem not to matter here, according to what Donald Trump has been doing. Now, when it comes to the different component of your question there about funding, yes, indeed, South Africa deeply depends on American funding, especially when it comes to HIV/AIDS treatment. The South African Medical Research Council, earlier in the year, their president released a journal article in which she said that this is probably the time when South Africa needs to be self-sufficient in terms of funding HIV/AIDS program. Because to put this in context, and between 2004 and 2020, the United States donated about 5.6 billion to South Africa under the rubric of the Presidential Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. So there would be really a body blow to South Africa if Donald Trump really carries through this and then withdraws all the funding that South Africa has been receiving for the last 20 years or something like that.
many people will tell you that South Africa seems to have preempted this move. And if you look at I think it's the last paragraph of the declaration that was adopted at the weekend, there was a talk not only just of the presidency of the United States, but also that of the UK, and I think it's South Korea thereafter. This idea that we all know that next year is going to be interesting, for lack of a better term, and the G20 will nonetheless continue thereafter. My question to you, though, Emmanuel, is what ought to be the response of the other G20 members if, in fact, the US finds a way of barring South Africa from attending this gathering in Miami through, I don't know, evoking visas, for example?
First of all, when it comes to the issue of revoking visas, I partly saw this coming because remember that the Trump administration barred Palestinian diplomats from from attending the United Nations in person. So I expected something like this actually happening here. How can the rest of the G20 respond the way they responded to this year's G20? And that is by recommitting themselves to multilateralism. Donald Trump had already said that they were not going to endorse the declaration that would emerge from the G20. Why? Because they knew that the language that would come out of that declaration there would not be in keeping with the language that the United States has assumed since Donald Trump returned to the presidency. You have seen that in the Department of Defense, that has now been refashioned as the Department of War, they have been removing words such as equality, gender, and DEI, and all that kind of stuff there. So they were actually afraid that the declaration might have language like that. But as we have seen, the rest of the G20 seem to be marching in step, so to say, with South Africa. And this was even the case when it came to South Africa's stance on Israel, and that is why France, the United Kingdom, Canada even said they are now amenable to having a discussion about the existence of a Palestinian state. So I hope, though, that they are going to recommit themselves to multilateralism. As far as attending the conference next year is concerned, I would want a situation where they still attend that conference in Miami, but they still push back about the United States, trying to show the United States that on this particular matter and on any other matter, such as these spurious allegations of genocide in South Africa, the United States stands alone and does not enjoy the support of the rest of the G20.
Emmanuel Matambo, as always, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate the insights. Emmanuel is Director of the Africa-Asia Studies for now. Thanks very much indeed.